Well, welcome to Metro Vancouver's 2010 Future of the Region's Sustainability Dialogue series. Today's Sustainability Dialogue is on a green regional economy. My name is Peter Holt, and I'm your moderator for today's dialogue. And the topic will explore the regional economy, and more specifically, the future of a green economy in our region. Today's topic and the questions it raises are important to the pursuit of a sustainable region. It is also a topic where information sharing and research is still very much required to fully understand what confronts us locally. We have 5 distinguished panelists with us today, and I'd like to thank the panelists very much for being with us today. Thank you, panelists. Once we've heard from the panelists, we will open up the floor to the dialogue. We lead off with Jenny Moore. Jenny is the Director for Sustainable Development and Environmental Stewardship at BCIT. Jenny is a LEED accredited professional and a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. Jenny.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to present today some concepts that I hope will trigger an interesting dialogue around a green economy. If we are going to be sustainable, we have to reduce our energy and materials consumption, the 20% of us that are using 80% of those resources, by around a factor of 4, which is 75% reduction, or as some would argue in the World Council for Sustainable Business, a factor of 10, which is a 90% reduction. Growth in an economy enables trickle down so that some people at the bottom can benefit from the economic activities. But for every dollar that trickles down, about 7 trickle up. Not a problem in a world of infinite resources where a rising tide does lift all boats, but a big problem in a world of resource constraints. And so think of a constraint as climate change, where more greenhouse gas emissions are being emitted in the atmosphere than nature is able to absorb effectively. So every time we grow, $7 are going up and enabling people with power and access to resources that's us, the 20% of the wealthy world, to access more. And in a growth economy, in a competitive environment, that's what we're doing. We're sucking all of that back into our own benefit, and a very little amount is trickling down. And so I would argue that that's a paradox that we need to rethink if we want to be a sustainable economy. Getting back to the growth economy, or the green economy, I think it is a huge opportunity. In the region, it's a small percentage, but it is a fast-growing sector. And I think that as will be discussed, they're in clean technology, they're in renewable energy, they're in making our buildings perform better and more effectively through building retrofits, for example. They're in beginning to think about how we're going to have a food-secure region. So these are great opportunities for us, and it's really exciting for this region, but I want to make sure that we keep in mind that green has to go with fair if we're going to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Next is Bob Williams, Director on the Vancity Board of Directors. Bob is a former Vancouver City Council member and Provincial Cabinet Minister with a background in economics and city and regional planning. Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I want to talk about an old technology here in Vancouver, railways. Anybody talk about them anymore? No, it ain't fashionable. But when I was Deputy Minister for Crown Corporations, I undertook the work for the West Coast Express. Everybody said at the time, nonsense. Well, no. When Glenn Clark and I, the Premier, met with the President of the CPR with this idea, just the 3 of us, I broached a new idea to him. I said, I'd like to do the West Coast Express, but I'd like to buy equity in your railway in the Lower Mainland. Imagine if we'd built equity into that line and the other railways in this region, what that would mean in terms of cooperation, sustainability, and the movement of people in our region. There's the Arbutus Corridor. The city won the fight over the Arbutus Corridor in terms of being able to designate the land use. But we don't need it all for a corridor. We could work out a deal with the CPR and see how we could use it in a complementary way and begin to transform that slow-moving part of Point Grey in some ways. But in addition, the CPR holds no value for the Kent Street line, And that is a gift, you know, from Marpole to New Westminster. But where's the dialogue? The Gateway people pat one another's back in terms of the Gateway project. We must address the railway question.
Thank you, Bob. We now have John Moustakas, Executive Director for the BC Cooperative Association. John has been a central figure in building the co-op movement in BC, and he also regularly consults on international co-op programs and has affiliations with cooperative education programs at the University of Victoria and, as Bob has already said, at the University of Bologna. John.
Welcome, everybody. So my key interest is actually the impact of economic structures on society. And in this case, the impact of economic structures on sustainability issues and on green practices. The key point I think I want to convey here and then develop over the course of this dialogue is that unless there is a change in the economic paradigm and the economic structures that define our economic practice, we will never solve the problem of sustainability or develop a green economy. So what does this mean? First, that social values have to be embedded into our economic policies, institutions, and enterprises. Second, that our economic system and our economic structures have to become more accountable, which means that they have to become more democratic. Third, that the market economy, which is primarily driven by the pursuit of profit, has to be counterbalanced by a powerful social economy, which is driven by the pursuit of social goals, supported and enhanced by economics. Now, we have a sustainability crisis because there's an inherent tension between the interests of private capital and the profit motive and the public good. This crisis will persist and grow worse unless we enhance our capacity to understand and alter our economic paradigm and humanize our economies. It is of immense importance how regional governments and regional economic institutions conceive of themselves as economic agents and how they reorganize themselves in a way that can transform regional economies to pursue socially positive and socially visionary goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Up next is Lee Davis. Lee is the CEO of Evans Reed Consulting, a firm focused on providing strategic, financial, and sustainability consulting services to SMEs, non-for-profits, and Aboriginal communities. Lee.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. I'm very much in the camp that indeed we have a strong and growing green economy in Metro Vancouver and also across British Columbia. And I think we have a global competitive advantage because of the abundant natural resources we have in this province, but even moreover, the talent pool that we have to use those natural resources. Lots of different definitions for green economy, lots of different definitions and figures for size. The Globe Foundation came out recently with a study which pegged green economic activity, goods and services, at over $15 billion, which is about 10% of the GDP of this province, and those numbers were for 2008. They also looked at 6 main sectors. They categorized companies into those 6 main sectors and found there were around 117,000 people working in the green economy, and that accounts for roughly 5% of the labor force in BC. This is a huge market potential for us. It's a world market, and in fact, the world market is estimated at something like $5 trillion. The largest markets being in order the United States, China, Japan, and India, and those are natural export markets for us in BC, being West Coast based. Now the green economy works, green products and services work because goods and services are provided at least the equivalent quality and utility and at a lower or similar price compared to non-green services and goods. And I believe very much the government needs to support and is desired in supporting both research and development companies and pre-commercialization green companies. But eventually, a green business, to be sustainable, to be successful, has to earn an appropriate risk-adjusted return. And that holds for private companies, it holds for cooperatives, and also, in my mind, holds for nonprofits. How do we accelerate the growth of the green economy? BC is a small domestic market. We need to have local governments, provincially, municipality, and federally, in concert, increasing their procurement and purchasing power. I mentioned that a lot of the clean tech companies in this province are small. They need to have government buying at an early stage. Likewise, the natural resource industry, and yes, they've had their troubles themselves, forestry companies and mining companies, they need to be early adapters of good clean technology solutions. Finally, let me say that government policy has to be expanded to allow for more clean technology, and we need to get the mass of investors involved in our clean tech sector by pushing further tax incentives, etc. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lee. Finally, we have John Tylee, Director of Policy and Communications for Vancouver Economic Development Commission since 2008. John.
Thanks very much for asking me to be part of this. We at the Vancouver Economic Development Commission have been doing a fair amount of work on the green economy in the last several months in particular. And we've done a lot of research, and one of the things we've found, which I don't think would be a surprise for most people in this room, is that of all the countries, of all the cities, of all the organizations like OECD trying to figure out how to grow the green economy and make it all work, nobody appears to have any magic formula. They're all partial solutions, good ideas, projects in train. There is an unbelievable amount of economic turmoil that is going on throughout practically all of the developed world, with the possible exception, so far, of Canada and Australia. The balance of power between the so-called developed countries, that would include us, and the so-called developing countries, which appear to suddenly have become as developed as we are, is changing. In the countries that are having economic turmoil, particularly the US and Europe, you don't find actually many people talking about the green economy anymore. The climate greenhouse gas emissions will not get through the US Senate while there is 10% unemployment. It doesn't exist. And the same thing applies to us. And I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, and thanks to the panelists. And now I'm pleased to say the mics are now open. And the first question.
Hi, Mark Lee with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. One thing that I thought was missing from the presentations was a discussion around fossil fuels and the key role that plays in powering our current economy. I think the Greenest City Action Team actually nailed it when they called for zero fossil fuels in the city of Vancouver by 2040. A target that we should probably expand to Metro Vancouver, if not the entirety of British Columbia and our export sector as well. So I wanted to just maybe throw that back to the panel to maybe give us your best recommendation about how we achieve this zero fossil fuel target.
So I'll put forward a couple of suggestions. First of all, I think one of the biggest challenges to my mind is I don't actually know that life as we know it in this urban environment would continue with no fossil fuels. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and that we don't have to actually reduce our consumption, because I don't think those fuels will be available for us, and certainly not at the cheap levels that they are available to us today. My suggestions would be trying to reduce fossil fuel consumption where it is exceedingly wasteful and I'll say stupid. And we do a lot of stupid use of resources in this city, in the urban environment.
I think I'd put an economist spin on this. You know, it's all really about you give somebody a hammer and everything looks like a nail. If you give an economist an economic problem, the issue is around price. So that if we're going to find a way to really ensure that things change, then the price signals from government have to change.
Okay, thank you very much. Joanne, you got something?
What I'm worried about with this metro exercise, which is really a good idea, is that we're really dancing around the global impacts issues. And I think what we're missing there is that the change to the economy with oil shock pricing and all energy going up is that all the business as usual that we take for granted is gone. So the jobs, the non-value added jobs, the so-called competition for middle class jobs, is not going to be the same thing. The tax base isn't going to be there. There's all kinds of things that are going to shuffle. And we're not dealing with that. We keep talking about changing traditional thinking. This isn't traditional thinking. This is linear planning of the last 50 years during the oil age. We need to look at true traditional thinking. And we're talking about stimulating action. We're worried about creating a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is happening. It's going to make us have to do things, but we'll be reacting. So I'm asking the question, when does Metro talk about the global impacts for real? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to start with you, Jenny.
Okay, well, I don't work for Metro anymore, so I really can't take
That's why I started with you, Jenny.
responsibility for that. But what I can tell you is that well, I'll tell you two things and then I'll stop because it's really not my place to address that question. But I do know that there are staff that are looking at these questions long term, and I think that one of the biggest challenges, and I would totally agree with you, is that I don't think we really ever have truly embraced what the science is telling us. And it's because the inertia in the system makes it so hard for us, one, to change because some people are vested and they're benefiting from the status quo. Two, at some level, none of us really want to face hardship or loss. So we try and frame sustainability as a better quality of life, and there are many, many benefits. But we are intelligent beings, and we could plan a safe landing. The challenge for us is that what's ecologically necessary is politically infeasible.
I think one of the ways out is to actually have top-class, first-rate demonstration projects which show dramatic improvement in whatever area it might be, whether that be energy savings or quality of life. And when you have that hard, fast evidence in front of you, I think politicians will be forced to have a much harder look and then perhaps hopefully even encouraged to embrace some of those new technologies.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go on to the next question now. Joe.
Hi, my name is Hamdi Rais. Bill mentioned something about democratization of the delivery system. It is a wonderful idea, but how can we achieve that?
Well, there's been a lot of interest on this subject in Europe. And no, it is possible. It's the first step is understanding that the delivery of public services or public goods doesn't have to be only the responsibility of government. How this is done, well, I'll just give you one sort of example. The one I'm most familiar with is the city of Bologna, where over 87% of the social services are delivered through contracts with social economy organizations. Healthcare, care for people with disabilities, youth programs, recreational programs, and so on, are all contracted to co-ops or nonprofit organizations that provide those services to their communities or their members under contract to the city.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question. We're going to keep things moving. Yes.
Jenny Kwan, MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant. Taiwan actually has a pretty unique sort of tech park, technology park set of initiatives, and they do it actually with different models. It could be publicly funded, it could be privately funded, or a mixture of both. And they also have an approach to it where they take one area, let's say that they want to expand their opportunities in, let's say is biotech, and they marry that with the private sector and then also with their educational institutions. And then they say by, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years out, we need this many people with the expertise coming out of the universities that could fill the jobs. And then so they fuel and focus on expanding that area in terms of green technology for their region, for their area. So I'm just wondering if anybody has some sense about that and what their thoughts are.
The whole question of a tech park and new opportunities in our industrial land is something the region is addressing. They're not looking at it in a sophisticated enough way, in my view. They tend to look at these purple areas on the map and so on. Our big employment areas are in places like West Broadway and around the Fairview slopes. So we have to think about the new opportunities for tech parks, indeed. And one we've ignored is Tawasin. The Tsawwassen Band now has a very substantial land base there. The expansion of the port, that has huge opportunities. The region must make itself a facilitator and work with the native band there, our First Nation people there. It's only a band of 400 people. It's an extraordinary opportunity. I was the first planner in Dela. This is a magnificent site. It's not going to be agriculture now, unfortunately, but we should be smart about how we do it in the future.
The tech center concept is a very, very important concept for all parts of the region, but I think it's something that we need to think about in the context of the very small size of our firms. The other thing I would say is that particularly in the context of the green economy, where we definitely need incubators, a lot of the types of green innovations that people are talking about a lot and we need to exploit are in things like smart grid. And that requires bringing together green companies and also IT companies and communications companies. So those links between different sectors that support and interact with the green sector are equally important. And tech centers of a small scale, I think, are a really important way of doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question?
My name is Romanda. Thank you all for your very insightful thoughts today. I wanted to bring it back to what Lee Davis had mentioned. You said that you felt that support by government financially, especially for projects and for companies, is needed for us to move forward. John, you also mentioned that it's price that really is going to make it happen and go forward. So that kind of made me wonder about why then do we have a gateway project moving forward instead of a public transit system that could have been expanded for a lot less cost. So how can we as a people and as citizens of this region actually convince our governments or show them that these are the choices we want made to make those types of investments, because when we do try to show them, it's not working. So what would you suggest we do to convince our governments to make those investments?
Lee.
Well, my first suggestion, Romanda, is we get you elected, I think, because we need people like you that are looking at these projects with a different perspective. And what I'll suggest is that so much of the analysis is probably simply profit and loss and not so much triple bottom line, which looks at the green or environmental consequences and the social consequences. I haven't seen the final analysis for the Gateway project, but my guess is that there was too much of the former and not enough of the latter.
Okay, next question.
I would like to have the feedback from the panel about leadership, because we really haven't talked about leadership in terms of making all these things happen. I'd like your perspective of where it should come from, and where do you think it's going to come from. So I'll leave it to the panel, whoever wants to answer first to that.
I'm going to say two things. I think that leadership is going to come from the non-government organizations working in tandem with the private sector organizations that are beginning to see the opportunities to move this, and eventually we'll start to see local politicians. The one exception I will say is the province on the climate action stuff and the City of Vancouver right now on their green economy. I think that's the kind of leadership that can business and academic and NGO organizations can tap into.
Bob.
Well, we have to democratize more aspects of our economy and government. So, you know, we need to empower the regions, the Kootenays, the Caribou, the North, Vancouver Island, and so on. And we also have to then change the nature of how we govern ourselves in this region. There are enormous challenges here.
Actually, I have a feeling that there is a lot of leadership that's bubbling all around us, frankly. And the leadership is emerging from the ground up in a lot of different places. But it's also beginning to appear in some politically strategic places. And I would say the City of Vancouver is one example of that. So I'm not quite as negative around the question of leadership. What I am very critical of is that the leadership from the places of influence and true economic and political power continue to hew to a very, very counterproductive, I think, line around, you know, what constitutes, you know, economic development, what constitutes, you know, social good, and so on. I think that's what needs to change, and it's not going to change from within there. I think it has to be changed and challenged from below.
Okay, thanks, John. Lee, 30 seconds.
I'm going to, excuse me, I'll agree with what John, I think Bob just said. I mean, I've seen a lot of leadership
in the streets in the downtown east side where I do some work, we're seeing some fabulous urban farms. And I think that's just a start. I work with a First Nation group on Vancouver Island that had all of 220 band members, and they've now got probably majority ownership in the largest independent power project, I think, in Canada, which ultimately will pay huge dividends for them. So I think it's happening in the street, but I would also maybe repeat what I said before, that I think it's up to us individually to get into politics at some level, whether it be municipal or provincial or federal, and push our own views, and rather than be listeners, be drivers and actors.
Okay, John, very quick.
Most GHGs are created in cities. Cities only have 8% of the total tax take. We know that both the creation of GHGs and we know that 80% of the GHGs come from local transportation and from buildings, and both of those things are regulated, not completely, but regulated largely by local governments. So I think as this process we're all going through unfolds, we will find the local governments become far more important and senior levels of government somewhat less important.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John, and thank you, everybody, for your participation today in this dialogue. Thank you very much. Thanks for attending.
Email us your comments regarding this topic at sustainableregion@metrovancouver.org or call 604-436-6794.